Hello everyone, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Soma Sarkar. The name of the present module is Energy Resources Part 2, Distribution, Livelihood and Scarcity Concern. The name of the paper is Resource Geography. Through this lecture, you should be able to explain the basic concept of energy scarcity. Followed by it, you will be able to understand the status and trends of energy scarcity at global and regional perspective and explore major factors responsible for energy scarcity and understand possible future prospects. Global energy markets are in transition, where rapid growth of economy means increase in energy demand. Energy resource scarcity is a global challenge. No single country is self-reliant in resources needed to power its economy, and as a result, its efforts are not equal across regions. The pressure of energy resources demand is more visible in developing economies, particularly within Asia. The degree of dependence and the types of energy resources are important factor too. It helps in understanding when can the resource scarcity leads to a cooperation or conflict. Serious inequalities are prevailing in meeting global demand for access to energy. As per International Energy Assessment Report 2011, at present 1.3 billion people are lacking electricity and 2.7 billion people still rely on the traditional use of biomass for food preparation with associated impacts on deforestation rates, soil erosion and human health. This condition of without access to reliable electricity or the power grid and the entire dependence on biomass for cooking and lighting is called energy poverty. The dependency on fuel wood also has a demographic aspect. As per fuel wood consumption is shown to increase with or decreasing household size, but to decrease with urbanization, indicating a wealth effect. Now, let us explore the global trend of energy resources since 1965. The demand for energy has surged. On the consumption scale, global primary energy consumption was 1.8 a year, that is a 10 years average, with an increase by just 1% in 2016 following growth of 0.9% in 2015. As was the case in 2015, growth was below average in all regions except Europe and Eurasia. All fuels except oil and nuclear power grew at below average rates. Energy consumption in China grew by just 1.3% in 2016. Despite this, China remained the world's largest growth market for energy for its 16th consecutive year. It is important for us to understand trends of major energy sources around the globe. So, let us start by one and another followed by another energy resources. So, the first energy resource that I will like to discuss is oil. Oil remains the world's leading fuel, accounting for a third of global energy consumption. Oil is gained global market share for the second year in a row, following 15 years of decline from 1999 to 2014. Global oil consumption growth averaged 1.6 million barrels per day and about 1.6% average its 10 years average for the second successive year. China and India provided the largest increments. During 2015-16, production in the Middle East rose by 1.7 billion barrels per day, while the production outside the Middle East fell by 1.3 million barrels per day, with the largest decline in US followed by China and Nigeria. Thus, the weakness on the supply side was driven by non-OPEC production, which fell by about 0.8 million barrels per day, its largest decline almost for last 25 years. In recent times, OPEC took some decisive actions which caught many observers by surprise and dramatically changed the course of events. First, by not cutting production in November 2014, triggering a collapse in prices, and then last November agreeing along with 10 non-OPEC producers to a production cut totaling 1.8 million barrels per day. Such type of decisions, however, causes supply imbalances and stress on resources in the long run. Let us move on to another energy source, that is natural gas. World's natural gas consumption grew by 63 billion metric, or say for example 1.5%, which is slower than 10 years average of 2.3%, while European Union has gas consumption rose sharply by 7.1%, the fastest growth since 2010. Meanwhile, Russia saw the largest drop in consumption by any country. Global natural gas production increased by only 0.3% because of declining production in North America and partially offset strong growth from Australia and Iran. Outside of the US, on the demand side, gas consumption in Europe rose strongly, about 6%, helped by both the increasing competitiveness of the gas relative to coal and weakness in European nuclear and renewable energy. Gas trade grew by 4.8%, helped by 6.2% growth in liquid natural gas imported or exported, where most of the net growth in liquid natural gas export came from Australia. US liquid natural gas export rose by 6 times between 2015 to 16. Looking at the growing market for LNG, although China continued to provide the main source of the growth, it's striking that the increasing availability of supplies has prompted a number of new countries, including Egypt, Pakistan and Poland, to enter the market in the last year or two. Our next energy interest is coal. So, global coal consumption fell by 53 million tons, or rather say 1.7% for the successive second period, and that is a second successive annual decline. This shift largely reflects structural factors like the increasing availability and competitiveness of natural gas and renewable, combined with government and societal pressure to shift toward cleaner and lower carbon fuels. The largest decline in coal consumption were seen in US and China. For example, in China, which at the beginning of the year introduced a series of measures to reduce the scale of excess capacity in the domestic coal sector, improved the productivity and profitability of the remaining mines. In addition, the government further constrained production by restricting coal mines to operate for a maximum of 270 days, down from 330 days. The impact of these measures was dramatic. Domestic coal production fell sharply and prices jumped sharply higher. This rise in global coal prices further depressed global coal demand, particularly in power sector around the globe, with natural gas and renewable energy the main beneficiaries. As a whole, world coal production fell by approximately 6.2%. Now let us move on to renewable source of energy, that is hydro and nuclear energy sources. Renewable power, that is excluding the hydroelectricity, if we say, grew by 14.1% in 2016, which is below the 10 years average, but the largest increment on record. Wind provided more than half of the renewable growth, while solar energy contributed almost a third despite accounting for only 18% of the total. It took around 20 years for the share of the countries producing a sizable amount of wind power to increase from 15% to 75%. Similarly, solar achieved the same degree of diffusion in less than half that time. In sharp contrast, nuclear energy plateaued at less than half the number of countries. The main reason for such variation is the fact that the transfer of wind and solar technology is not subject to any security restrictions, because that has helped their rapid diffusion relative to the nuclear power. Asia Pacific overtook Europe and Eurasia as the largest producing region of renewable power. China overtook US to be the largest single renewable producer. Global nuclear power generation increased by 1.3% in 2016. China's increment, which is the maximum, that is 24.5%, was the largest of any country since 2004. Hydroelectricity power generation rose by 2.8% in 2016, where China and the US provided the largest increments. However, Venezuela experienced the largest decline. Now, when there is an increment in renewable energy worldwide, why we are stagnant by energy scarcity? So let us concentrate on the factors determining energy scarcity. The first among the factor is population growth. Population has been addressed as a driver of global environmental change, where households can be considered as units for analyzing consumption patterns. In the developed world, household size and composition changing from extended families to nuclear ones. Even the rise in the number of households has been faster than the population growth in these regions. Since larger households generally use less energy per person than smaller ones, household segregation can cause double the rise in energy consumption that would occur from population growth alone, as there is an increase in the number of appliances and the level of electricity consumed per person. Similarly, the age composition of a household also has an impact on energy consumption, as visible from energy consumption pattern in Australia, Brazil, Denmark, India and Japan. It is found that the residents' average age is positively related to per person energy consumption, while household size and urban locations are negatively associated. Following this, let us move on to our second factor, that is urbanization. Urban areas which house half the world's population, utilize 2/3 of the global energy and produce 70% of global carbon emissions. In developing countries, as the locations of shopping or entertainment centers, schools or hospitals are widely spread and less easily connected by public transport systems, with the increase in income, individuals are likely to make more personal trips and ultimately acquisition of personal vehicles. Moreover, most energy for transport comes from fossil fuels, and the rise of number of car users produce various environmental impact, from urban health problem, that is through land and water degradation, to contributing to climate change. With this, our next concern is economic development. Consumptions and production are both components of economic development. Therefore, during the last century, global economic output grew more than 20-fold, while materials extraction grew by almost 60 billion tons per year. Technology is a key factor in the production of goods and services, and an important one in terms of environmental impact too. Although studies have noted the energy efficiency gap for years, despite the potentiality favorable returns in energy cost saved, particularly when life cycle costing is applied, neither consumer nor industry have made significant economically beneficial investments in closing that gap. After understanding the reasons behind the crisis, we must explore the global scenario of energy scarcity. Owing to the expanding economic activity, growing population and climate change, energy resources have become increasingly sensitive to higher price, supply shortage and export restrictions. In a world in which there is a big and growing aptitude for energy and no abundant cost-effective substitutes, countries are viewing oil and gas supply security as a top national security issue. Energy use in the world's developing countries is increasing rapidly due to the driving forces like population growth, economic growth, urbanizations, as I have mentioned earlier. As for the Gulf countries, the world's largest oil and natural gas producers, they too suffer from several internal and external security problems. The Arab-Israel conflicts, Islamic terrorism, political instability in Iraq and Iranian hegemonic submissions are in these regions. Thus, violent conflicts and other form of political instability could lead to major disruption in energy supply, which under certain circumstances would necessitate the use of military forces to protect the flow of oil and natural gas. National differences on a market model for energy also exhibit tension and raise the prospect of conflicts. For example, in the Caspian region, where significant amount of oil and natural gas is present, major powers like China, Russia, Europe, US and India have been fiercely trying to secure their energy interest. Similarly, in Persian Gulf, Japan, India and China have stepped up their diplomatic efforts to secure their share of oil imports. Now, let us move energy-wise, so that for our better understanding, we can compare how each energy resources are being under threat. So, first energy is oil. For several decades, fear about impending oil scarcity were widespread as debates about peak oil continually resurfaced. We have passed one important peak when high-grade reserves have largely been depleted, and despite efforts over the past decades, discoveries of new reserves have remained flat. What remains is becoming increasingly costly and difficult to produce in financial, technological, and of course environmental terms. Geopolitical tensions over remaining reserve are also evident in many regions such as Arctic. In addition, an estimated 65% of global oil reserves are under state ownership. This rising concern that the availability of the oil will become even more politicized than it is already in the years to come. This increase in world oil demand will mainly come from non-OECD countries, especially emerging Asian economies. Understanding the past scenario, it has been predicted that energy trade between regions is expected to rise by 2030 as major consumers such as US and China and emerging economies become more dependent on oil imports from the Middle East, Africa and Eastern European or Eurasian countries. Next energy source is natural gas. Demand for natural gas is expected to increase by 52% between 2006 to 2030. Due to lack of sufficient domestic supply to meet growing demands, imports will rise for all current net importers. Between 2006 and 30, dependency ratio, that is the ratio of total imports versus total consumption of European Union is projected to jump from 57% to 86%. China's, that is from -1% to 48% and India's from 26% to 61%. Moreover, natural gas resources are also highly concentrated in the hands of a few national companies. For instances, National Iranian Oil Company, Saudi Aramco, Qatar Petroleum own 46% of the total natural gas reserves and are responsible for 26% of total world production. The same 17 national oil companies own 63% of total natural gas reserves and produces 40% of the world's gas. Therefore, the energy scarcity and uncertainty in the near future is dependent on a number of factors like economic output and structure, population growth, technical changes and capital stock turnover, human attitude and behavior, fossil fuel supplies and extraction cost, energy market development, energy subsidies and changing environmental objectives and policies among few to mention. Now about the future outlook of these energy situation or the energy crisis scenario. As per the world's population increases, more people aspire for better and higher material standard of living, creating an ever increasing demand for goods and services as well as for the energy required to provide this. However, the rate of growth in the future is expected to decrease due to an assumed leveling of population growth and continued improvement in energy efficiency. The share of energy production are likely to change with the proportion produced from oil decreasing and natural gas increasing. Coal levels are expected to stay relatively constant and nuclear energy use will increase due to investments in Asia. However, if nuclear energy plants are not followed through, more coal is likely to be used, with significant implications on climate change mitigation efforts. On a per person basis, the largest growth in electricity production occurred in the developed countries and will continue. The global average per person electricity production grew by 33% between 1992 and 2008, while that of developing countries grew by 68%. So, there is a contrast between these two regions. Renewable energy production is gaining ground. There has been a 30,000% rise in solar energy supply since 1992, a 6,000% increase as well to the wind energy, and similarly 3,500% rise in biofuel production, all from very low bases. For this, the credit goes to the decreasing cost of these technologies and 2010 adaptation by 1999 countries of policies to promote renewable energy. Owing to the growing economy of development countries, global energy consumption is expected to continue to grow and will lead to increase in carbon dioxide emission. To stem the rise in global greenhouse gas emissions, the Kyoto Protocol encouraged the transfer of cleaner technologies from the developed to developing economies and recommended for reduction in existing trade barriers. In conclusion, it can be said that no single country is self-sufficient in resources needed to power one economy. Energy resource scarcity is a global challenge. However, its effects are not equal across regions. The pressure of energy resource demand is increasingly coming from developing economies. Renewable energy production is gaining ground is a good sign for sustainable development. Specifically, due to decrease in the cost of the technologies, huge leap in solar, wind and biofuel production, all from very low bases, have been registered. For this, the credit goes to the decreasing cost of this technology. Thank you for joining me in EPG Pathshala. Thank you.